We are so honored to have Troutman Sanders as our exclusive sponsors of this event for the 7th year in a row. GAL's mission is to enhance the welfare and development of women lawyers and to support their interests. And the Public Affairs Committee supports that mission by making it easier for our members to engage in the political process. And getting informed is the first step to getting engaged. So we want to provide a forum for organizations to come and tell you about what they hope to accomplish in the upcoming session of the Georgia General Assembly. We are pleased to hear from some great organizations tonight. And you know what, I'm not going to give a long intro, we're just going to jump right in. So let me introduce Helen Robinson, the Director of Advocacy for YWCA of Greater Atlanta. Helen and the YWCA mobilize diverse groups of women leaders to advocate for policy solutions to improve health and safety and the economic empowerment of women and girls in Georgia. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like an honorary member of GAL, even though I am not qualified in any way to be a member, because I think this is my third time presenting here today, and I really enjoy it, so thank you very much for having me. We are the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. We're a local affiliate of a national organization with a mission to empower women and eliminate racism. And here we work on state-level public policy that can improve the lives of women and girls in our states. One of the things that we do is we run the Women and Girls Policy Stakeholder Roundtable, and we meet quarterly. It's about 30 organizations, GAL attends, which allows us to talk about all the different issues that our various organizations will be working on here in our state, and to try to figure out what are some proactive items that we can move forward that will have a direct impact on women at the state level. And that is how we develop our annual policy agenda every year. The second thing that I want to talk about briefly before I get into our policy agenda is that we run the Georgia Women's Policy Institute at the YWCA, and we have alumni here in the room tonight. And I always joke, but it's actually not a joke, it's true, that every important meeting that I go to, I see alumni of the GWPI. And what this is an intensive training program to get more women involved in developing state-level policy and making sure that women's voices are heard on the state legislation that actually impacts our lives. And I couldn't not start today without talking about our recent election. On November the 7th, we had women candidates appearing on ballots across Georgia for that election. And I want to point out that out of the 11 candidates in the Atlanta mayoral race, 3 were women. And guess who came in first, second, and third? The women. Several women also ran to fill open state legislative seats in special elections and will be advancing to the runoff on December the 5th, including women in House District 60, House District 89, Senate District 6, and Senate District 39. A woman also won House District 117 to replace newly appointed Judge Regina Quick. And previously, in another special election, Senator Kay Kirkpatrick won in District 32. So we will, after December 5th, we will do a final calculation. But before these elections, we were at 26% of women state legislators, which it should be, what should that percent be? 50. So hopefully we will continue to have more women run and we can create more parity in our state legislature, which is an important first step to ensuring that good policy gets passed. So in 2018, we're going to advocate for proactive policy solutions to improve the health and safety and advance the economic empowerment of women and girls in Georgia. The first thing on our agenda is we want to empower more women, more working women, to move into the middle class by enacting the Georgia Work Credit, which is a state-level earned income tax credit. And as you all know, the EITC has great bipartisan support at the federal level, and 26 states have a state-level EITC. And this tax credit helps working families, especially those living in rural areas, give them a small amount of money that they can use for things like childcare and transportation. And this, if we enacted a state EITC in Georgia, would help 770,000 working moms. So we would love to see that happen. And also a recent study from our own Emory University found that state-level earned income tax credits have a positive impact on birth outcomes. And unfortunately, Georgia's preterm birth rate rose in 2016 after several years of decrease. Our rate in premature birth climbed to 11.2%, up from 10.8% in 2015. And we are higher than the national average on that rate as well. So we definitely need to be thinking of ways to use policy to improve those statistics. Second on our agenda is we'll be working to pass House Bill 281. Representative Scott Holcomb introduced this bill last session. It's the Georgia Tenant Victim Protection Act, which will allow survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault to terminate a rental agreement when they need to relocate for safety reasons without financial penalty or other negative consequences that might affect their ability to secure future housing. And this is going to actually mirror what is already required in federal law for subsidized housing, and it would just apply it to other types of housing in the state of Georgia. Another issue that I've been working on is, as you all know, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran an investigative series over about a year about physician sexual misconduct. And so I've been working to promote a few simple policy changes that we could enact in our state to hopefully help that problem. And one example would be to pass legislation to require criminal background checks for licensure for physicians or for the renewal of their license in our state. And we are one of only 6 states that don't require that now. So we think that's a common sense thing that we can hopefully move forward. And then we also would like to look at policies to improve our state's maternal mortality rate. As most of you might know, we have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country, unfortunately. And we are looking for the Georgia Maternal Mortality Review Committee to issue some recommendations soon, and we hope that there will be some policy solutions that we can support as women advocates. And last, of course, we just try to put a gender lens on all the important issues that are happening in our state. There are study committees meeting right now on transit, on issues facing rural Georgia, on healthcare access, and also on homelessness. And we will be watching for some potential policy solutions that will be coming out of that work and making sure that we're looking at how those solutions would help improve the lives of women. Last but not least, we also do defensive work if anything is proposed that we feel will harm women, and we will make sure to let you all know about that. You can sign up for our advocacy e-newsletters at YWCAAtlanta.org, and I will be sending out our final policy agenda and then those action alerts that tell you when to make your voice heard on these issues. And we'll also be holding a Capitol Day, so I'd love to have members come to that, and we will announce that date again over our e-newsletter. Any questions? Annie.
So you mentioned that you guys have defensive work that you're usually looking for policies. Is there anything that you're expecting to happen this year?
I never like to say expecting to happen, but we try to be ready. This past session we worked to fight against a harmful bill that would have restricted the ability of our college campuses to deal with sexual assault cases, and so we'll hopefully not have to deal with that again. You can read in the media about religious freedom bills and whether or not we will be dealing with that issue again, and that is definitely an issue that affects women, the ability to discriminate against women. Any attempts to limit women's access to health care services or to have the ability to pay for their health care. And we also want to be on the lookout for any voter access restrictions as well. Great question. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So next we're going to hear from Bernetta Haynes. She is the Director of Equity and Access for Georgia Watch, which is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to ensure Georgians are educated and protected on matters that impact their wallets and quality of life. Burnetta's work centers on ensuring that access to health care for all Georgians and increasing access to clean energy to improve health and financial well-being of low-income families and communities. Thanks, Burnetta.
And not to put you on the spot, but it's Bernita, which is what everyone says. Everyone always says Bernetta the first time. I blame my mom. Phonetically, it doesn't make sense. Hi, thank you guys for having me here. I'm very delighted to be here. So I will not even bother going into the spiel of Georgia Watch, since you just did all that work for me, and jump right into some of the policy issues we'll be paying attention to and focusing on in the comment session. So I don't really like microphones very much, so let me know if you can't hear me. I tend to project pretty well. Oh, that's right. All right, so I'm going to stand right here then. So in terms of our legislative policy agenda for this coming year, we will be paying close attention again to predatory lending legislation. We're not sure if the title pawn loan industry will be coming back this year, since we gave them a pretty swift beatdown last session. But we will be keeping our eye on any legislation that they put forth to weaken the existing usury limits. We, on the healthcare spectrum, will be paying attention to a decent number of legislation that may or may not come up. In particular, any legislation to address insurance network adequacy. When consumers enroll in healthcare insurance plans, they should have a reasonable amount of access to all the covered services in that plan and the providers that they actually need to access for certain services. But the provider networks can be pretty limited and very narrow, increasingly so, meaning that folks end up having to go out of network to get necessary medical services and providers, so they end up paying more money. We are supporting any legislation that would set stronger network standards so that people don't end up having to go out of network to access care. Connected to that, we're very supportive of legislation to end surprise medical bills. One of the main ways that people end up getting a surprise medical bill is when they go to an in-network facility and they end up seeing an out-of-network provider within that facility. So we're supportive of legislation to end surprise medical bills. Ultimately, it's really about making sure that people have coverage and that they are able to see doctors within their networks. Also, in terms of medical-related legislation that we are going to keep our eyes on and be very supportive of, APRN legislation, Advanced Practice Registered Nurse legislation, that would loosen some of the restrictions related to what they are allowed to do. We're very supportive of legislation that would allow them to practice to the full extent of their licensure and training. And lastly, in terms of medical and healthcare access concerns, we are part of the Department of Public Health Community Health Workers Advisory Board, working to gain stakeholder consensus on standardized training and certification programs and models for reimbursement of community health worker services. That may actually ultimately result in legislation and the need for legislation, and we would be supportive of that. The state income, earned income tax credit, as mentioned, we're very supportive of that for the very same reasons mentioned. It's really about putting disposable income in people's pockets, infusing money into our local economy, and boosting business. So we're very supportive of that, and we think Georgia needs to get on board with the rest of those 26 states. From an energy perspective, we will continue to protect Georgia, Georgia Power in particular, but Georgia utility customers from nuclear construction risk. We're exploring as many options as possible to hold Georgia Power accountable for all of the delays and cost overruns associated with Vogtle. Lastly, in terms of financial protection, we are also keeping our eye on land contracts. And land contracts they're like alternative mortgages, essentially, with very little in the way of protections. But essentially, a would-be home buyer enters an agreement with the owner of the property or the seller to basically pay off the price of that property while they're living in it, or so to speak. And essentially, there are no protections the way that there are with mortgages and things of that nature. So we're keeping our eye on any sort of land contract legislation that comes up. We are also, in terms of financial protection, forming a statewide coalition that would basically include partners who want to be very proactive about legislation and policy against predatory lending practices in our state. I'll end off with saying that we are also very supportive of HB 21, the Georgia Tenant Act for domestic violence victims. And that pretty much wraps up our legislative priorities and what we'll be paying attention to. Any questions? All right then. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bernita. So next we're going to hear from the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. Shayna Morris. Is it Shayna or Shenna? Sheena Morris is the Director of Policy and Community Engagement for the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She leads initiatives which seek to engage the collective community around the issue of domestic violence, brings together voices of community-based and mainstream programs working to end domestic violence against women, and serves as the second member of the Georgia Coalition Against Domestic Violence's public policy team. So thanks so much.
Thank you all so much for having me this evening. Again, my name is Sheena Morris with GCADV. Just a little bit of background information on who GCADV is and what we do. We are a statewide member-based domestic violence coalition who provides technical assistance and training to Georgia's domestic violence programs throughout the state, as well as community-based organizations. One of our charges is also to be in the public policy arena, ensuring that good policies are passed in support of survivors and their needs. And our organization also does a good bit of community engagement and awareness work. So that's kind of a quick overview of who we are and what we do. Let's see here. Okay, I had a PowerPoint ready for you all. It's okay if we don't go into it. It's quite all right, really. It's not coming up. Nope, not coming up, but it's okay. It's totally okay, because we do have a short amount of time. The primary piece of legislation that GCADV will be focusing on this year is House Bill 541, which essentially is legislation to, thank you, keep firearms out of the hands of domestic violence perpetrators. It's okay. Maybe it is me and my techie skills tonight. There we go. So for us, domestic violence and firearms, as many of you all may know, is a very deadly combination indeed. It is well known that a firearm in the household of a domestic violence perpetrator increases the risk of homicide to domestic violence victim by 500%. Just to lay a bit of background, for why this is such an important and pressing issue. But in addition to it being a deadly combination, we also see it as a very big public safety issue as well at GCADV. In a comprehensive analysis of 133 mass shootings that have occurred throughout the United States between January 2009 and July 2015, we have found that 57% of the mass shooting incidents include the shooting death of a current or former spouse or partner or an immediate family member. 28% of the perpetrators in many of those cases had a prior domestic violence charge. Some of these mass shootings may look very familiar to you all, such as the Orlando nightclub shooting, as well as the DC sniper mass shooting, And then most recently, as many of you all may recall, the most recent Texas mass shooting that occurred in Sutherland Springs, Texas. So let's see. Again, just a little bit of background information as to why this legislation is, again, so important. Georgia currently ranks 14th worst in the nation for the rate at which women are murdered by men. Between 2010 and 2015, there were 529 domestic violence-related firearms deaths in the state of Georgia. You'll see that I have a few of the numbers highlighted in red because I wanted to, create the understanding that this impact is far-reaching, that it does not only impact the perpetrator or the victim in many of these cases, but there were also, between 2010 and 2015, of those 529 deaths, 19 children who lost their lives, 9 friends and roommates, 5 bystanders, 13 parents of the intimate partners. So you can see the impact in that it's very far-reaching. So, someone posed a really good question to me tonight about, I thought there was a law that prohibited domestic violence offenders from being able to possess a firearm. Why is it that we need a state law? And while, yes, there are federal prohibitions that would keep firearms out of a domestic violence perpetrator's hands when they are subject to a qualified protective order or when they have been convicted of certain misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence. We do not have any state law to ease the implementation of that federal law. So some of, why federal law is not enough, because we've heard that there are enforcement issues, again, around enforcing the federal law. A lot of times we hear that there is no mechanism or any guidance for the removal of those firearms or the return of those firearms, right? So therefore, we see it as that we need a state law. And again, when you look at all of those around us who have some type of law prohibiting domestic violence perpetrators from possessing a firearm or ammunition, you can see that we're right dab in the middle. All of our neighbors around us have some type of legislation that would keep firearms out of the hands of domestic violence perpetrators. So again, as I mentioned, the bill that we are proposing is House Bill 541. And it is a bill to keep to keep firearms out of the hands of domestic violence perpetrators. So in doing this, we would like to make it a felony crime for domestic violence perpetrators to possess a firearm or ammunition, as I've mentioned, implementing the federal law on the state level. But then we've also asked to go an additional step. And if that person is the subject to a temporary protective order, that firearm also be removed from the home as well. So just not to hold us up. The hope in doing so is that we could be able to prevent the occurrence of domestic violence firearm-related homicides in the future. These are just a few cases of deaths that occurred, again, through that 2010-2015 timeframe where the individual was actually prohibited from having a firearm. And this last one, I've actually had the chance to sit across from her and hear her story. And it just drove home even more the importance of why we need a state law to carry out, the implementation of that federal legislation. So again, that is where GCADV will be expending much of its energy this year in carrying through House Bill 541. It is also very likely that we will also be supporting many of the legislative pursuits of our fellow colleagues in the room as well. So thank you. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I do a lot of domestic work,
Uh-huh.
forces, and so I occasionally dabble in TPOs. And I have had plenty of clients who had to turn in their guns when there's been served an ex parte order, and then they get like after the case expires or it's dismissed, they get their receipt back, and then they go back to the sheriff and pick up their firearms. So. Are you saying that county by county that doesn't happen?
That's right.
Okay.
So what we're seeing is that it varies county by county. There are counties throughout the state who actually are notifying, folks that they cannot possess a firearm or ammunition, and they are actually relinquishing those weapons. But again, it varies by county by county.
And then my follow-up question is, once that TPO expires, or in the event that the ex parte order is dismissed, you're not saying that they can't have their firearms?
Right.
It's just during the pendency
Right.
of protected.
Right.
Okay.
We're not saying that. We're not wanting to totally take people's firearms away from them.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I have some experience in this arena as well. The people that you listed, it seemed to be that all of those people shouldn't have firearms, shouldn't have had firearms, right? Particularly with the last one, which I think was in Cobb. Have you been able to sit down with the players involved in that incident, the previous incident, not the gunfight, but the previous incident, and go, hey, what happened? Why didn't this get through? I mean, what happened?
We have not been able to sit down with those individuals directly to kind of assess where. No, it's not that they won't talk to us, no. It's not that they won't talk to us, but we have not been able to sit down directly with them. I know that there has actually recently, and I mean very recently, been an attempt to sit down with those folks. So that's still kind of like an ongoing process that is currently occurring. Yes.
So having myself taken some pro bono cases representing victims of domestic violence and temporary protective order cases, the issue of firearms is not something that typically comes into play in the petition. Is that something that you're looking to revise?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
So when filing a petition for a domestic violence temporary protective order, the firearms don't always come into play in the petition.
Right.
So is this something that you're looking to revise? So that is another one of the questions or another part of the form that comes down through, and this is through Cobb County, where I have, again, just taking these cases on a pro bono basis, but is that something that you're looking at?
And I cannot directly answer that question. It may be something that my predecessor, my former colleague Allison Smith-Burke, who was at our organization and who was really leading this effort, may have been having conversations with people about, but it's not something that I am directly aware of at the moment.
So, and I think it's not necessarily a policy thing so much as a matter of form.
Right.
Because there are many other areas that you look at.
Right.
As you're going through the form, but firearms are not included in that, right?
In that form. Right. So again, that may have been a conversation, like you said, not even from a legislative position, but just from a relationship with other stakeholders position. She may have been having some of those conversations, and I may just not be privy to them. Yes.
What's the likelihood of legislation passing this session?
We're hopeful. We're hopeful. It's been a 2-year process. We've really been trying to lay the groundwork, and, give good factual information, really have looked at what our neighbors are doing in this arena. So we're hopeful that in this second year, we'll go all the way. Any other questions? Y'all had the questions for me this evening, didn't you? Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to hear from Laura Colbert. She is the director at Georgians for a Healthy Future, which is a nonprofit consumer health advocacy organization that works to advance the access to quality, affordable health care for all Georgians through education and outreach, coalition building and mobilization, and public policy advocacy.
Thank you. As Annie said, I'm Laura Colbert. I'm the executive director at Georgians for a Healthy Future, and we are a nonpartisan consumer health advocacy and policy organization. You may not have heard much about healthcare this year, so we're really trying to raise awareness about this issue overall. Obviously, healthcare has been a topic of discussion a huge topic of discussion in policy. Since the Affordable Care Act was passed and prior to that as well. I'm going to talk today about our state level work, but know that in the background we are monitoring what's happening at the federal level. We are prepared to respond to proposals there that in any way compromise access, cost, and quality of care that people have, as well as helping to promote federal efforts that would build on the progress that we've made over the last couple of years. But number one on our policy list at the state level is an issue that we've worked on for the last 5 years, Medicaid expansion. We have around 600,000 uninsured Georgians who make less than about $16,000 for an individual each year, who don't have access to the federal marketplace or employer employer coverage or the Medicaid system as it currently sits now. So Georgia has the option to expand its Medicaid program to cover these low-income Georgians, and we help lead the Cover Georgia Coalition, which advocates for Medicaid expansion, along with a number of the partners that you've heard from tonight and we'll hear from a little later. So we're going to continue our push for that. We don't expect Georgia to expand Medicaid in a traditional sense. If our state chooses to go that direction, we think we will see something more like other conservative states like Arkansas and Indiana, where they're doing kind of a waiver-style expansion, and that's a very state-specific, has its own spin on it. It's very, tailored to Georgia. So we will be working with legislators and policymakers to ensure that waiver is really does facilitate access to the healthcare system and doesn't put up unnecessary barriers to people getting coverage. We'll also be working to strengthen the Medicaid system this year for the people who are already covered through that system. And Medicaid in Georgia is really a children's program. We've got about 2 million, a little less than 2 million folks in the state covered by Medicaid, and 2/3 of those are kids. So we want Medicaid to be strong and to be robust and to really cover the healthcare services that are needed by those kids, and then also by the seniors and people with disabilities who are also covered by the program. So we'll be working not only to strengthen Medicaid, but also any defensive work that needs to happen that might threaten the program at the state level. As Bernita mentioned earlier, we are also working with Georgia Watch on surprise out-of-network billing and network adequacy protections. We want to make sure that when consumers purchase health insurance, that it's really fulfilling their needs, that they are able to access the full scope of providers that they need to get healthcare services, and that they're not surprised with out-of-network bills that they didn't know that they were going to be receiving. And then again, any defensive work along these lines, the federal administration is providing states with some new flexibility around regulating small and individual market plans. And so we want to make sure that Georgia doesn't compromise the current protections that we have gotten through the ACA, and that we're building on those protections and not removing them. 4th, we will be working with some partners in the mental health space. Behavioral health is kind of the big umbrella term for both mental health services and substance use treatment and services. And so our behavioral health partners are going to be working on some legislation that ensures that behavioral health services are covered in the same way under health insurance as physical health services. This is already required at the federal level, but there are some things that states need to do to make sure that they're regulating insurance plans, that they are auditing them to make sure that they're really following these regulations, and to set some enforcement requirements at the state level. So that would be through our Department of Insurance. So we just want to make sure that when folks have access to these mental health services, that their insurance is covering it in the same way that they would a broken leg or an emergency room visit or something else. And then finally, we have kind of a broad category at the end. We are really doing a lot more thinking now that there's more people covered in the state about how health interacts with other systems, so education, economic opportunity, the justice system. And so we'll be supporting any policies that impact those systems that also lead to better health outcomes for people and communities across the state. That's a big, broad bucket, and so we won't be working on every little thing, but we'll certainly be pitching in where we think that there is a need for a healthcare consumer voice at the table. And then we always keep an eye on anything impacting rural healthcare. That's been a big topic of discussion among our policymakers and our legislators, especially over the last year or two, as well as a tobacco tax. We would always love to see our state pass a higher tobacco tax, and to better invest in our public health system. Prevention dollars are one of the really the wisest ways we can spend our healthcare dollars in the state, and so we would love to see a little more investment in the public health system. For those of you who are really interested in healthcare and healthcare policy, we have our annual Healthcare Unscrambled event on Thursday, January 11th. It's bright and early in the morning at 7:30, and we have a bipartisan panel of state legislators that come talk about state healthcare issues that they think are going to come up during the session and how they're going to address it. And then we also have a keynote speaker this year. It's Robin Rudowitz from the Kaiser Family Foundation, and she'll be really looking at the Medicaid program, trends across the country, and how that might impact Georgia's system here. And then finally, you can find us on social media and at our website, healthyfuturegA.org and at healthyfuturegA. So, do you guys have questions? No? Everyone's tired of hearing about healthcare these days. I would just put in a plug. Please keep an eye on the federal tax plan. They have, the Senate has put in a provision to repeal the individual mandate, which would essentially mean 13 million people would lose their health care coverage and premiums would spiral upwards. So I encourage you to call your senators and to ask them to oppose any bill that results in people losing coverage. Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to hear from Megan Gordon. She is the Public Affairs Coordinator and Lobbyist at Feminist Women's Health Center. Which the organization fights for better state laws on reproductive justice and helps other Georgians discover their power to do the same.
Thanks. Hi. My name is Megan Gordon. I work at Feminist Women's Health Center. We have been in the Atlanta area for more than 40 years now. We are a reproductive justice center nonprofit. We have a clinic where we provide comprehensive gynecological health services, including abortion care. And we also have a community engagement and advocacy network where we work on things like voter registration, civic engagement, empowering communities of color to overcome like racial health disparities in their communities. We do a lot of stuff, and state level advocacy. I'm going to be pretty brief tonight because we actually only have one proactive bill on our agenda this year, and that's because we anticipate having to do a lot of defense. When you work on issues like reproductive justice and specifically abortion, election years are especially years when people like to prove their conservative bona fides by trying to close our doors. And we are seeing in other states, as state governments and folks who are against abortion access anticipate President Trump being able to appoint more conservative justices to the Supreme Court, we are seeing increasingly extreme attacks on abortion access specifically, as folks are trying to basically provoke an opportunity to relitigate Roe v. Wade before a court that they hope will be more conservative. So while we know that things are always pretty wild on our end, and on election year, we are leaving open a lot of capacity for defense, because who knows? Who knows what 2018 will bring to us all? That said, I want to shift to a happier note and talk about a bill that I'm really excited about, which is the Whole Woman's Health Act. It was introduced last session, and because our legislative terms technically come in sort of 2-year sets, it's already been introduced and is still around next year, or in 2018 in the coming session. That bill is based on the Supreme Court case by the same name that came down last summer. In that case, the Supreme Court struck down a lot of really, really onerous restrictions on abortion clinics in Texas, and ruled that going forward, in order for any restrictions on abortion access to be constitutional, they must be based on actual provable health benefits to patients who are seeking abortion, and that those benefits must be proportionate to the burden the law places on abortion access. And so, because that is going to be a case-by-case determination, that overturned the law in Texas, but did not have any sweeping impacts for other states. So the Whole Woman's Health Act would implement that standard in Georgia law and would repeal any restrictions on abortion access that cannot meet that standard. We are specifically naming in that bill Georgia's Women's Right to Know Act, which is our mandatory waiting period and biased counseling law, which requires 24 hours before an abortion that patients receive a state-mandated script and wait then 24 hours before they can receive their abortion. So we are hoping to get a hearing for that bill this year. We're really, really excited about that opportunity. And we're also going to be supporting other measures that come up. We don't work strictly on abortion access or on that direct reproductive health care, because we really work out of a framework that recognizes the whole needs of people throughout their lifetime, including the right to have safe relationships, to parent and to parent with dignity, and to have safe and healthy pregnancies. So as you can guess, there's a lot of work in all those areas to do in Georgia. So while we are spearheading the Whole Woman's Health Act, and we'll be working really hard on that, we're also going to be supporting our friends in a lot of the measures that you've heard about already tonight. So that's it. I said it'd be brief. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes. In the House, it is 455. In the Senate, I always get this wrong, but I believe it's 238. Any other questions? Also, I'd be happy to look up that Senate number for you afterwards if you're interested. Any other questions? Thanks, y'all. Have a good night.
Okay, next we're going to hear from Pam Tatum. She is the president and CEO of Quality Care for Children. She's served as a CEO for more than a decade, working diligently to support the organization's mission of ensuring that all Georgia's young children are nurtured and educated. Thanks so much.
Okay, I have a PowerPoint because I'm kind of nerdy like that.
Let me get it up for you.
So what we do is a little different. We're primarily a direct service organization, but we do get involved in policy based on what we learn from the parents and the children and the child care programs that we serve. So, this one?
Just hit enter when you're ready to go.
Okay. So to tell you just a little bit about us and why the issue that we work on is so important, we have two key priorities as an organization. One is creating quality. We want to make sure that child care programs provide educational care to kids and nutritious meals. And the other one is ensuring access, and that's helping parents access quality, affordable care so that they can work, attend school, and get ahead. So one of the things that really limits access is the cost of care. So this may surprise some of you. You may think that this is low. There's a place not far from here, a couple miles from here, that's about $20,000 a year. But the average cost of child care in Atlanta is $9,314. So if you're making minimum wage, that's about 61% of your income. If you're low income, making $37,500 basically, it's about 25% of your income. And then you can see the median income in Georgia or in Atlanta, you know, it's about 15%. So it's pretty easy to tell that a lot of people just simply can't afford licensed childcare. So what do they do with their children? Because they have to work. We call it Craigslist care. If you look at Craigslist under childcare, you'll see ads. They'll say things like, I keep kids, $50 a week, no drugs. And so we have a lot of low-income kids who are in situations where they may not be saved, and they're definitely not getting what they need to be prepared for success in school. Atlanta is also ranked near the bottom in social mobility or in economic mobility, and we think this is one of the reasons for that, that it's really based on whether you have high-quality early learning experiences or you don't, and that, of course, depends on how much your parents can afford to pay. The cost of care in Georgia, statewide, a little less than the cost of care in Atlanta, but still you can see you have an infant and toddler, you're paying more than $14,000 a year. And you wonder how families can do that. So if you're making minimum wage in Georgia, you work half of a year, 26 weeks, just to pay for child care for one child. Another thing to show you is that when you think about all the things that we have that can help parents pay for college, we have a Hope Scholarship, we have all kinds of grants, we have work study, we have all kinds of ways for kids to go to college. The cost of childcare, the average cost of childcare in Georgia is more than college tuition. A year at UGA is only $50 more than a year in an average childcare program. So there's not much help for low-income parents who need care. The help we do have is the child care subsidy, which is called CAPS in Georgia. It's primarily federal funding. It's very limited. It serves about 10% of the families who need it in our state. And then we have an interesting policy in Georgia that says college student parents are not eligible. So if you work at McDonald's, you may be eligible. If you're working on your degree in college, you are not eligible for a subsidy. We're one of 8 states. Yeah, I see the look of surprise. It's kind of crazy. So what we're doing at Quality Care for Children, as I said, we're primarily a direct service organization, so we have a program called Boost that is providing scholarships to low-income parents who are attending college. And we're using the data and the voices of those parents to try to change that policy in Georgia. Our legislative agenda this year is primarily one about the budget. We need an increase in CAPS funding so that more children can receive child care and so that their parents can work and go to school or get ahead. Longer term, we want to change that policy about attending college. But the truth is, right now, if we change the policy, it would be meaningless because there's just simply not enough money. So we're asking for the governor to put $9.5 million in his budget this year. Last year we got $5.5, so we got something. We're asking for $9.5. It's a drop in the bucket. I mean, $9.5 will serve about 2,500 kids for a year. But it's an overwhelming problem, and I can tell you that I've been in this field for so long, and the reason the needle has not moved is because we go, oh, well, that's too big. We'd never get enough money for that. Meanwhile, clock is ticking, parents are struggling, and children are falling behind. So that's our strategy, is to get ongoing advocacy to get money year after year. We're also working on other fronts to come up with other plans that other governors might like better and might be able to put into place that would address the issue better. But for right now, we need your voices to help us get the 9.5. So one thing you can do is you can text us at QCC Georgia, text 66866, and that will sign you up for our advocacy alerts. There's my contact information also. You can feel free to call me or email me if you want more information. Any questions? Yeah.
So a lot of the issues that we see with childcare relate to the working poor and not being able, kind of on that line, not being able to get CAPS or
Right.
Other programs to help pay for childcare. With your organization, how do you assess eligibility? Is it straight income, or does it matter how many other children that they have?
Right.
Education level? Are there any other factors?
Well, we are only serving right now the college student parents, right?
Okay.
What we've done, last year, or 2 years ago, we looked at the policy about the income eligibility. In Georgia, you lost your subsidy if you made more than 50% of the state median income. So if you made more than $16,480, you made too much to get assistance. So the maximum the feds allow is 85% of the state median income. So we've worked to change that. So the cutoff that you're talking about, we used to call it the cliff, where a family's getting a little bit ahead, then they yank the child care out from under them and they fall off the cliff. That is not quite so bad anymore. But we still have limited funds. We have priority groups in Georgia. If you're not in a priority group, you're not likely to get a subsidy. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, so for our final presentation, we're going to hear from Lori Vickery. She is a Pascal president, but she's also on the executive committee for the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, which is an organization dedicated to strengthening and upholding Georgia's civil justice system and protecting the rights of Georgia citizens and consumers. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you. And before I switch hats, I feel like I should thank you, Annie, for putting on this presentation this evening, and also to Veronica before you for both passionately pursuing the issues that face us as women attorneys, as women and children in our communities. And I feel very thankful and blessed to be here tonight. But now I'll switch hats over to the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, where I now serve on the executive committee there. And there are several issues that face us. I'll try to be brief. I know I'm the last person up this evening, but I think the first issue that we have, and a lot of the issues that I'll be talking about this evening are more focused on just the right to pursuing justice, to pursuing our right to a trial by jury in our communities. And I will say personally, myself as a personal injury attorney, I have people who come to me from auto collisions to slip and falls, trip and falls, to product liability cases. And one of the first things that people say to me when they approach me are, I never thought that I never planned to sue anyone. And there's a stigma associated with, pursuing recovery when you've been injured in a situation. And I hope that that's something that we can diffuse. And these include executives from major corporations who say, I just never thought that I would do this. And I think that no one knows what it feels like to be in that situation until you or one of your loved ones has been seriously injured in some sort of event. And so I think one of the first things and the most important issues that we'll be faced with in terms of trial attorneys is the erosion of the collateral source rule. And that is essentially being able to bring evidence to trial of insurance or other payments that have been made on behalf of an injured person in some sort of one of the events that I just mentioned. What the bills or what we're worried about being introduced is that only the amount of the actual paid medical expenses, that would be what would come to light or be presented at trial. Well, I can tell you as a plaintiff's attorney and we've had a lot of talk about health care this evening, is that there are a million different situations that can present itself there. It can be the person who is self-pay or has no health insurance who goes to the emergency room because that's the only place they can go for health care. So maybe they're charged 10% of what the normal rates would be. Or maybe you have someone who has terrific corporate health insurance coverage. And so the rates that their company is paying may be a little bit higher than what was the 10% roughly, or whatever it is that's paid on behalf of the person who has no insurance at the emergency room. But if those amounts was actually paid, is introduced, then that will greatly affect the recovery that our clients are able to receive later down the road. And it varies. I don't think that there could be any one rule to, if you completely introduce any evidence of what's been paid on their behalf. It could be TRICARE paying, it could be Medicare, it could be Medicaid, it could be health insurance. If all of that comes in, the effect of that is that the person who is actually seeking some sort of recovery for their injury or for pain and suffering, it will go down significantly. And in addition to that, you may still have health insurance companies who are coming back asking for reimbursement for whatever they've paid on their behalf, which then gives the person, the injured party, very little incentive to pursue their claim. So I think that is a major issue that is in front of us, and hopefully we can put off, defray. Hopefully that will not move forward. Another big issue, and I'm sure that several of you have heard about this before, is the elimination of the right to trial by jury in medical malpractice cases. And I think that the best analogy would be that what some people are proposing is that those cases should go before an administrative board, much like workers' compensation systems, where if you have certain injuries, you have a right to certain recovery within limits. In medical malpractice, and also, I mean, there are a lot of other procedural considerations that go along with this, that some people want this on a rocket, or insurance companies may want this on a rocket docket, or they want experts to be disclosed prior to cases being filed. I think that the end result of that is that the people who have been seriously injured by medical malpractice, and most people who are in a medical malpractice situation have been seriously injured, and most often catastrophically. Some people are confined to their beds, some people pass away. These are major issues that come about, and it's not, I think it's another tort reform issue, that you can't limit someone's recovery to a certain dollar amount, not knowing the circumstances of each individual person and what they have been going through, the loss of wages or loss of earnings that they've had. I think that is a big issue. It's not gone through the legislature, and hopefully will not pass through this year either, but that's another one that we predict will be going through this year. A third issue that I'll mention is a city immunity bill. As we all know, there are certain sovereign immunities related to governmental entities, either the state, the county, or the cities. The cities are in somewhat a different situation than the counties, and there are certain legislations that have been, or not legislation proposed, but certain issues that have been brought about that tend to change either anti-litem notices or the liability of the cities. Specifically, there was a 2017 decision that said that the city, any litem notice does not apply to claims for intentional torts or nuisance claims or other claims that didn't apply to just straight negligence claims. And that's something that the GMA, the Georgia Municipal Association, is trying to change going forward in the legislature. And so that's another issue that the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association is watching. But those are 3 big issues. I'm the last person up this evening. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll be happy to answer them. All right.
I'm just curious, what's the GMA's position about the city's immunity? Just briefly, like, what is their defense per se to say, you know, we want immunity just like the counties?
I think that, you know, I don't know all of the specifics of that, to be quite honest with you, but I think that what they're trying to do is even the playing field between the cities and the counties, because there have been different regulations applying to each of them. And so they're hoping to hop onto that same level as the counties, perhaps.
But we're going to find it, right?
That is the plan, yes. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you guys all so much for coming. I don't know what that means.
Communications committee would like if the speakers would come up and we can get a photograph.
Okay.
You and Michelle.
Okay, yeah, so if the speakers could come up just afterwards so we can take a photo. But before we do that, I do want to give put in a plug for the Public Affairs Committee's next event, which is, it's our Day at the Capitol, which we're doing, it's a joint event with GABWA, and that's going to be on January 23rd. It is going to be at the Capitol building. So we're very excited about that. And also for our the Gold Dome program. So you guys have heard about a lot of legislation here tonight, and I'm sure you guys are going to want to see what happens with that during the session, and that's what the Gold Dome is all about. We provide updates for when things happen with these bills and with other bills that are submitted to us. Michelle, you got a question?
I just have a statement. I want to thank you guys all for coming, and those of you who are members, we are so happy to have you here, and those of you who are non-members, we would hope that at this type of event and others that Annie has spoken to you about will draw you to become a member of the Georgia Association for Women Lawyers. If you're not a lawyer, we also have a friend of all category that you can consider. But we would really like to see you back, and we would really like to have your membership. So thank you. And I'm Michelle West, I'm the president for GAL.
Thanks, Michelle. All right, good evening, guys. Thank you so much.